All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. I know some will will continue to trickle in into the webinar, but again, thank you all for joining. We have 30 minutes and we have a decent bit of content to get through, so I'll try to breeze through this so that we have enough time at the end to leave questions for Q&A. So, you all know why you're here, right? This is E78's webinar for strategic annual budgeting. We're going to talk about kind of our approach specifically within the FP&A services division, of how we approach annual planning. We work with a lot of different companies, do a lot of different budgets, a lot of different ways, but we've found certain things to sort of be best practices. And that's the idea here, is to talk about those best practices. And then, like I said, we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. And then, as you may or may not know, we have included several things that you will receive for joining this, namely a calendar, a format for going through the strategic offsite, etc. At the end, you can see how you can receive that by reaching out, and we can get that stuff over to you. So in the interest of time, let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to be covering sort of 5 main areas, and then again, leaving time for Q&A at the end. The first is going to be really around the FP&A journey, right? The whole theme of the way we approach annual planning is by using it as a chance to sort of reset and not just think about, the coming year, take the numbers from this year, gross them up by a certain percentage, and then, apply them to next year, but really use the annual planning process as a chance to pause and reset and rethink about, not just the next year, but the next 5 or 10 years and the big picture choices that we're going to make, which will cascade into shorter term, decisions, which can be measured and kind of milestoned out. But, the way you go about that is highly dependent upon where you and your organization are in terms of your FP&A journey. So we're going to talk about that, kind of breaking it into 3 simple chunks about, what the FP&A journey looks like in those kind of 3 main buckets that we view. Then we're going to talk about how you should begin the annual planning process. Again, very dependent upon where you are in your FP&A journey, but thinking about the annual planning process as a theme for starting over, we'll talk about how we recommend you begin the process. The output of that process, the way you begin it, which again we'll get to in a second, we'll talk about how you cascade the outputs of that kind of big picture thinking into shorter term actionable goals, plans, KPIs, etc. We're going to talk about how zero-based budgeting is really the tool that we like to utilize in order to kind of deploy that from the ground up reset sort of thinking and compare it to more standard sort of incremental budgeting. And then lastly, we're going to talk about deciding between which tools you should use. There's a lot of tools out there now. There's Excel, Adaptive, Anaplan, Google Sheets, etc. Lots of different platforms out there you can use, and we're going to talk to you about different ways you can decide kind of what tool makes the most sense for you. All right, so let's get started. So FP&A journey, right? We have up here the standard kind of crawl, walk framework. I'm sure you've all heard this, right? And as I said, what makes sense for you in terms of the way you approach annual planning really depends on where you are, in your journey. I've come across in my years of working in FP&A consulting many companies who never have done annual planning. You'd be surprised, probably to many of you out there who are been FP&A your whole career or a lot of your career. You'd be surprised to think, wow, you don't do a budget, but you come across that fairly regularly. So in situations like that, right, where you're more in the crawl phase, you might also run into situations that are described here, right? Companies that have very little, in the way of a financial model, really not driver-based at all, just P&L focused. No regular process for reforecasting, very little in the way of variance analysis. FP&A, to the extent to which it exists, is very siloed. There's a heavy time requirement to pull and aggregate data, and there really isn't sort of any ongoing reporting or business intelligence to really give stakeholders and departmental owners and heads the information that they need to make better decisions. The walk phase, a little further along, right, where you have basic FP&A capabilities, but again, they're generally siloed within the FP&A team. So what that may look like is you have a basic driver-based financial model. Typically, it's what I've seen at least is it's only going to be P&L focused, not balance sheet, not cash flow. Obviously, P&L is kind of the first statement people look to forecast, but it is very important to forecast cash flow and balance sheet as well. You may have regular reforecasting, but you may not really involve stakeholders, aka department heads, or the leadership team in gathering inputs and reviewing variances and telling the story. You may have variance analysis that focuses on the what, but not the how or the why. You may have reporting. It may not be that hard to pull data together, and you may have some, enterprise level KPI dashboards. But again, the idea is that you have FP&A, but it's not necessarily ingrained in the business fully, as it is in the run phase over here, which is again where you kind of have the goal center. That's what we're trying to get everybody to. I'm sure everybody wants to get there, but obviously it takes time to get there. What this phase looks like is really where you have 3-statement driver-based financial modeling in place. Again, that could exist in Excel, that could exist in an EPM. You have monthly reforecasting. Again, some may not think monthly reforecasting is important. Quarterly is enough. That may be the case for your organization. Not saying you have to be monthly to be in the run phase, but we think that having at least a consistent recurring reforecast, specifically on the monthly cadence, helps you just to really steer the ship and make factor in the real-time data and real-time situations that are happening into a reforecast so that everyone's kind of on the same page. You have forecasting, data is easily pulled and structured, et cetera. And that's really, I would say in the run phase. So again, everything we're going to talk about here is very highly dependent upon where you are in your journey, and I'll kind of touch on that throughout each slide. So very simply, this may seem very obvious, very basic, especially on the left side, but where do I begin the annual planning process? Well, I think the best way to begin the annual planning process is to develop a calendar, right? A calendar which communicates, and this is kind of small over here, but this is something that we'll be providing, if you're interested, a template for this, that really sets up, what are the milestones, what are the dates by which we plan to have things completed, if we're having a strategy offsite, who's coming, when are we going to have it, where are we going to have it, when are we having working sessions to gather expense inputs, revenue inputs, all the assumptions we need? When should we expect our first round roll-up, right? When should we expect the second round roll-up? Because inevitably, first round always comes in high, right? We've got to go back and make changes and adjustments. So this really just serves as a one-stop shop, a scorecard, that can be reviewed and tracked, green, yellow, red, kind of in the milestones if you're hitting those dates on a weekly or monthly basis, depending on how often you're reviewing, these things with your extended leadership team. But it's a one-stop shop to have, everything in place and what you're working back from. Maybe less obviously, on the right side of the page of the way that we recommend beginning, your strategy, your annual planning process is really with the strategy offsite. And I think some companies do this. Other companies think it's a waste of time and money to get offsite and talk. I really think it's important. I think, getting outside of your normal office, getting off Zoom, getting together in person, getting somewhere, kind of outside the normal cadence of your work schedule and environment can really help to, just kind of get everyone thinking a little bit outside the box, to use a bit of a cliche, and just thinking about, hey, let's have a conversation. Let's really think about the future. And we actually are going to provide you a framework for going through the strategy offsite, which is really constructed around 5 main pillars, and you can see them over here. So when we do this, and we work with a lot of clients when we do this, we facilitate this as we start at the top, right? What is our winning aspiration? What is our mission and our vision? Who do we want to be? The big picture, somewhat vague corporate statement, right, about who we want to be, but we'll eventually cascade that down into tangible actions and actual meaning of things that we're actually going to do to make that mission, that vision happen. That cascades down into where will we play, right? So where will we play is things like, what products and services are we going to provide? What geographies are we going to work in? Who are our target customers? Cascading into how will we win, right? How will we compete? What's our competitive advantage? Are we going to compete on price? Are we more of a luxury brand? And we're going to compete on image and marketing. And then what capabilities must we have, which is really like, what systems, what tools, what people, what places, what office locations do we need to make all of this happen in order to and also to measure progress. And then lastly, what management systems do we need, which really is that last part I said, which is, okay, we've got all these goals. We're push all these goals out to our department heads. Everyone's going to have different goals and KPIs that are going to orient us to this longer term, big picture vision. What management systems, whether that's weekly reviews, scorecards, people and analyses and tools that we need to aggregate all that data and make sure that we're making progress against the KPIs and against the initiatives that we're taking in the short term in order to hit those longer term ambitions. So that's kind of the framework that we use for going through a strategic offsite, which again we will be providing. Okay, so this is just a snapshot. I know this is a lot kind of coming at you at once, but this is a snapshot of what, when we finish up a strategic offsite, that's what we're meant. This is what we hope to leave with, right? This is kind of the consolidation. Again, there's a lot of slides that may go in, a lot of working sessions in the strategy offsite, breakout sessions where you're, scribbling notes and coming back together and talking about these things. But the idea is you can put it all together at the end, right? And you can have clear definitions and clear measurable goals of where you're trying to go, right? Starting from your vision your mission to your vision, which really we view your mission as kind of the application of your vision is the application of your mission, which should mean it should be measurable, right? It should have clear goals. What dollars of revenue do we hope to achieve by next year or 5 years from now? What gross margin do we expect to achieve, right? Once you have that guiding light in place, then you can work backwards and say, all right, what management systems do we need to have in place? We need weekly reviews. We need special attention reviews. We need monthly financial reviews. What's our value proposition, right? We need, this is a fake company that we created here, but for this, Eleanor's Distribution, which is a manufacturing company, distribution company, we need on-time delivery. We need low waste rate. We need, very competitive pricing, cascading to our core capabilities. So you can see, I don't need to go through all this. It's all laid out here, right? And it's very tangible. Where will we play, right? Where are our products going to physically be? We're actually going to sell. What geographic markets are we going to sell in? So it's trying to move away from just vague consulting-y buzzwords up here in your mission down into literal places and faces and measurable numbers that you can track progress against in a one-stop shop. And again, this being the goal of that strategy offsite, to leave with this put together so that everyone can frame it on their walls and everybody can work towards the same thing. And you may think that's very big picture, right, for annual planning, but if you're able, if you have the luxury, and I recognize that having a strategy offsite is somewhat of a luxury, if you have the luxury of doing so, I think this is a great way, again, to get everybody fired up and get everybody aligned so that the planning process, while it can still be very cumbersome and arduous, you're largely ensuring that everyone is working towards a common set of goals. You're not going to, if you've decided you're going to be in Walgreens, you're not going to have someone planning they're going to be in, a different pharmacy that I can't think of right now along the way. You've decided that's where you're going to be, so you're not going to waste time focusing and budgeting in different areas. And this helps you to orient around that. Okay, so very quickly, we're going to talk about incremental versus zero-based budgeting. I think most of you are very probably familiar with these terms, especially if you've worked in FP&A. I think incremental budgeting, which is really just taking current year's numbers and grossing them up by a determined percent, is typically the norm. I know that I've done it a lot, and sometimes it's the easiest and fastest way to go, right? The advantages of it are it's simple, it's fast, it's consistent, right? Versus zero-based budgeting, which is I would say, much heavier lift. But I think in keeping with the spirit of annual planning is a chance to reset and think about, everything from the ground up within reason, right? Maybe there's certain things you don't need to think about from the ground up, like office expenses or T&E, et cetera, but maybe there is. It's a chance, zero-based budgeting is really a chance to rethink every assumption about, your revenue, about your expenses. If you're investing in new product lines or you're expanding into new markets, right? You don't really necessarily have a lot of data to go off of. You may, but you may not have a lot of data to go off of. So you have to think about those things from fresh perspective. I said T&E, maybe something you could skip over, but maybe not. Maybe we're taking a totally new sales strategy next year, right? Where we're going to spend a lot more on events. And so we have to rethink all of our T&E versus I know that a lot of companies, the baseline is really just to say, all right, I spent 15 grand on T&E last year. I'll probably spend 18 this coming year because of inflation. I'll do the same trips. That's fine. It's fast, right? And maybe that's accurate and maybe that works. But I think that you shouldn't let, just what's simple and fast and consistent get in the way of really trying to rethink what are all the tangential, kind of factors that are really going to be affecting, my kind of great reset that I've taken to think about, the future. And again, the right approach for you, I think, is highly dependent upon where you are in your journey, right? If you've never done budgeting and you're just kind of starting out, incremental is probably great. It's better than nothing, right? It's way better to have a yardstick like an annual budget to compare progress against in the coming year than it is to not at all and just constantly be reforecasting and not really knowing what you're comparing back to, right? But I think if you do have the chance and you do have the capabilities and you do have the bandwidth and the people and the staff to really think about, everything from the fresh perspective, zero-based really is the way to go, in my opinion. So getting kind of near the end here, and again, trying to leave time for Q&A at the end. What FP&A tools are right for my organization, right? As you're going through and doing budgeting, everything we talked about before is a little bit more of a philosophical approach to it, right? But at the end of the day, you're going to have to do this. Someone has to sit down and punch numbers into a sheet, or multiple sheets, or multiple people, in order to aggregate all this information, right? And of course, the right tool you decide to use is, again, there's not one perfect way. What we have here is not to say that, for example, I'll talk about this in a second, 25 million is the clear cutoff between Adaptive versus a manual tool like Excel. Absolutely not, or any other sort of EPM. We're Adaptive partners, so that's why we're mentioning Adaptive here. But the idea here really is that as we move away from Excel, right? Excel is still it's very ubiquitous, right? It's around, everybody's using it. But as platforms like Adaptive, like OneStream, like Anaplan, like Vena, et cetera, become more and more popular, more and more companies are starting to make the decision to move to those platforms because, to be frank, they're just sick of the manual, Excel hell, excuse my language, of just constant Excel files floating around, et cetera. But again, some of those tools may be overkill for where you are, for your size, et cetera. So what we have here is, again, not perfect by no means. It's not hard and fast rules, but our attempt at trying to create some, guidelines around when it makes sense to stick with a tool like Excel and when it makes sense to move into a more automated platform like a Workday Adaptive or an Anaplan. So, one of those rules, very simple, is annual revenue. We've seen, that the $25 million range tends to be a good cutoff, though we do have companies on either side of that number that, smaller that use Workday and greater that use Excel. But I think, using revenue as sort of a proxy for complexity in terms of, just the number of stakeholders that are involved, the number of departments, the structure of the business, right? Revenue tends to be a decent proxy for that. And that $25 million range is where, hey, you start to reach a scale. You might, have a certain, a lot of files may be required to create the budget if you have more and more departments, more and more business lines, more and more products and services as you increase above 25 million. That, managing all of that in manual platforms like Excel can become cumbersome. Resourcing, right? I mean, if you're going to have a tool, everyone knows how to use Excel. Everyone's very comfortable with Excel. Something like Adaptive or something like Anaplan, I think, can make people's lives easier over time. They're once you learn how to use them, but you're going to need some people who are expertise to help train others, right? And you're going to need people on the FP&A team really to be the champions of those systems, to really own those things, be kind of the power users, and then help others to use them. I think over time they can save, a lot of time and make things a lot more efficient, but there is a learning curve up front versus, again, Excel, it's pretty easy, very open, everybody's used to it. So there really isn't much of a learning curve involved. So having the resources to teach and own these systems is very important. Data integration, having desire to automate data flows as opposed to pulling data out of systems like CRMs and ERPs manually. With Excel, yes, you can set up certain things with, Power Query, data extracts, et cetera, to pull data out. But, these EPMs, they all come typically with stock connectors that make it very easy to automate, actuals flowing in so that reporting is automated and, just again, reducing the manual, nature of something like Excel. Reporting and visualization, I think if you're just doing everything in PowerPoint, you don't really, you're not past that point yet. Excel can be great. But if you have, a desire to have dashboards, KPI dashboards that you can create by department, one for the marketing department, one for the sales department, et cetera, then, something like an EPM like Adaptive is great because you have that capability, but you can also link, these systems back to Excel. Adaptive, for example, has an add-in called Office Connect, which enables you to pull all of your data from Adaptive into Excel and work with it there if you so choose. You can also push data back up into Adaptive so the two things communicate with each other very easily. Stakeholder involvement, right? I think Excel makes a lot of sense where, stakeholders are kind of uninvolved in the FP&A process. Again, if you don't want to kind of open things up, right, and just, everything's kind of being run through a couple of FP&A people on the team, then Excel probably is okay, because the point here is that you're trying to minimize files, because when you get more and more people involved in this process and the collaboration with an FP&A, and you have more and more files floating around, I just know from experience it gets harder, and I'm sure many of you do, it gets harder and harder to manage these things. Versus, if you would like to have, department heads, stakeholders going in and interacting with their own area of the company, having custom views of, hey, again, head of marketing, here is your staff, your expenses, your actuals, your forecast, et cetera. Go in, tell me your budget, here's your to-do list, tell me the hires you're going to make next year, tell me the events you plan to attend, punch all this out, right? And I can give you a person, an FP&A, who will work with you, make sure that's all good. But ultimately, here's, you don't have to email me back and forth an Excel file. It's all centralized in the system. More and more people you want to involve in that process and just give them the rights to own their own areas. I think an EPM is a much better solution than Excel. And then scalability. Again, Excel, if you're 25 million, you're not growing rapidly, either organically or through acquisition, Excel is probably fine. But if you are scaling rapidly, you're adding new entities, you're adding new departments, you're adding new chart of accounts. Something like an EPM can be. It depends on which one you go with, but they can be very good at absorbing that information and not creating an enormous amount of rework. Rebuilding your model, but really just kind of layering things in and re-engineering the structure. And again, this is something we'll provide to you all so that you kind of, if you ever run into a situation where you're trying to make a call between using an EPM or sticking with Excel, you can use this as a bit of a cheat sheet. All right, well, we have 7 minutes left, so I will stop there. And just before I answer up to questions, again, if you are interested in receiving one of these 4 things, or not one of these 4 things, excuse me, all 4 of these things, the framework for the strategic offsite, a template for creating that strategic charter, the decision tree between Excel and an EPM, and also a budgeting calendar template. Here is my email. You probably all have it from the invite as well, but you can click on it here or take a screenshot of it, reach out, and we will provide that back to you. So, all right, questions? Okay, I do see one question here. So what services does Z78 provide to support annual planning? So within the FP&A services team, we have ongoing managed services where we provide, a team who will build a model for you, do all the monthly FP&A, do the annual planning along with your team. Also fractional resources. We also have a team that does, adaptive implementations, cleanup, et cetera, EPM, implementations. So everything really you kind of just saw, we support and help out with. Other questions? Okay, got one more. So what if you're a brand new company with very little historical data? Yeah, I think in that situation, right, trying to use whatever you have at your disposal, whether that's, information from other companies, market research, and just kind of getting comfortable with whatever assumptions that you're making about, your annual plan. So let's say you're, a SaaS company, right? What do you expect in terms of your acquisition costs? And you can easily find that kind of information, especially now with tools like ChatGPT, et cetera. What should I expect from a customer acquisition cost, depending on the the marketing channels that I'm spending in? What should I expect from a churn rate, right? Do I believe these things? Do I agree with them? And then as you accrue data, right, you can check them, right, and you can tweak them. But up until that point, having very little data, you kind of just have to rely on what you believe is reasonable, and using whatever outside resources you can get your hands on. Other questions? Yeah, I got one right here. Any experience with helping a company create data to assist in going through a sale process? Yeah, so when you say create data, what do you mean by create data? I don't know if you want to type that, but the answer is yes, we do have experience with helping companies go through the sale process, both from the buy side and from the sell side. So whether that's doing diligence, doing QV, et cetera, we have a lot of involvement. We actually have a whole business unit devoted to transaction services that's outside of FP&A, but we have experience within FP&A as well. Reports and data and acquire one. Oh yeah, I mean, yeah. So when you said create data, I wasn't sure exactly what you meant, but yes, creating reports, aggregating data, creating analyses, that's exactly what we do. That's kind of our bread and butter, right? It's FP&A's bread and butter. So Yes, we do. If you're interested, I can reach out to you afterwards. We can maybe have a discussion. But yes, creating reports, pulling together data, very much within the wheelhouse of everything we do. Other questions? Okay. I don't have any else. Well, thank you all for your time. Great talking with you, even though I didn't hear any of your actual voices. You just heard mine. But like I said, feel free to reach out if you have any questions, anything you didn't want to ask here, anything that comes to your mind, any desire for any of the things that we talked about today to be provided to you. Again, reach out. Happy to provide those things and just talk with you. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.